The arrival of settlers in lands to the west in Appalachia sparked some of the first Indian wars in the West. Yeah, you heard right, the West. For in the 1770s, the Wild West was right in the middle of Appalachia in what's now Kentucky and West Virginia. Today we tell the story of a pivotal battle that took place there on the eve of the American Revolution. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley, along with Rob Mullins, and this is another one of the stories of Appalachia.
Yeah, they don't call it wild, wonderful West Virginia for nothing, do they, Steve?
No, indeed. This is an amazing story, and it's all part of the Indian Wars, specifically Lord Dunmore's War. And it is just a fascinating story.
Now, we need to also point out, too, for those that are so concerned with history, this was in Virginia, but it's what we know as West Virginia now, but it was a part of the Commonwealth of Virginia at that time, right?
Right, because at that time, Virginia included everything west to the Mississippi River and north to Canada, which would include Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and I think part of Wisconsin. That's how big Virginia was.
Yeah.
Well, in any event, the Battle of Point Pleasant might not be as well known as some other battles. But, Rod, its impact on the history of Appalachia and the United States is immeasurable. In the fall of 1774, tensions were running high on the American frontier, now known as Kentucky and West Virginia, and this part of the colony of Virginia was used by Native American tribes as hunting grounds. Those warriors, which included the Mingo along with the Shawnee under the leadership of Chief Cornstalk, were occupying that area, which was increasingly seeing American settlements spring up. Tensions over ownership and use of the land brought escalating tensions between settlers and the Shawnee Indians.
It's interesting you bring up the Cornstalk, or at least Chief Cornstalk. I've got some of that on my family tree, my family history book, going back in several different branches of Cornstalk. So there we go again. Not Cherokee, but Shawnee in this case. But it's a clash of cultures and interests, Steve, and it's about to erupt into a battle that will shape the destiny of this region. In 1774, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, decides to take action to protect the settlers and assert Virginia's claims to land, sparking what has now come to be known as Lord Dunmore's War. Royal Governor Dunmore commissions Colonel Andrew Lewis to lead a militia force of about 1,000 men from southwestern Virginia to confront the Shawnee and their allies. Lewis's destination? Point Pleasant, a strategic location where the Kanawha River flows into the Ohio River. Lewis and his men made their way down the Kanawha River, guided by a long hunter named Matthew Arbuckle. His plan was to link up with another force by Lord Dunmore himself. Dunmore was marching west overland from Fort Pitt in what we know as present-day Pittsburgh. And yes, the Shawnee was led by Cornstalk, and they were ready to defend their territory.
Cornstalk had gathered a force of between 300 and 500 warriors from various tribes, including the Shawnee, the Mingo, and the Delaware. By the time the two forces converge at Point Pleasant in October 1774, tensions are running at a fever pitch. Now, the night before the battle, both sides are camped just a few hundred yards apart. It's a tense standoff, and Lewis's men are anxious, knowing that they're vastly outnumbered by the Native American alliance. And what about Cornstalk's camp? Well, Rod, Cornstalk's warriors are equally anxious. You see, they're aware of the risks of confronting a well-armed and determined militia force. In an effort to avoid bloodshed, Cornstalk sends a peace envoy to Lewis's camp with a message offering to negotiate.
Well, that sounds like it's a chance for peaceful resolution, but as history often goes, misunderstandings and miscommunications abound. The peace envoy who spoke, doesn't help here, who spoke no English, carries a wampum belt as a symbol of peace. but it's misinterpreted by Lewis's men as a declaration of war. Wow. That misunderstanding simply escalated things that much further. With neither side backing down, the Battle of Point Pleasant began on the morning of October 10th, 1774. It was a brutal, one-day-long engagement. Cornstalk's warriors attacked Lewis and his men at their camp, where the Kanawha River flows into the Ohio. Now, this battle was so fierce, it lasted for hours, eventually becoming hand-to-hand combat between the Native Americans and the Virginians. Cornstalk himself was reported to have been shouting encouragement to his men during the battle, urging them to, quote, be strong, end quote. Captain Lewis sent several companies of men to attempt a flanking maneuver under the command of Captain George Matthews. They were successful, leading to the Shawnee retreating back across the Ohio River under the cover of darkness that night.
The Battle of Point Pleasant resulted in significant casualties on both sides, with estimates ranging from 75 Virginians killed and 140 wounded. The number of Shawnee dead couldn't be determined since many of the bodies of the dead were tossed into the Ohio River. The next morning, men searched the battle site and found 31 dead warriors, including that of Puxanawa, the father of Tecumseh, who would later lead his own fight against the settlers moving onto his tribe's land. They also captured 40 guns, several tomahawks, and personal goods, which were later sold at auction, bringing in the grand total of 74 British pounds, 4 shillings, and 6 pence. The British were nothing if not thorough in their accounting. Well, after the battle, Cornstalk, realizing that further conflict would only bring more suffering, decided to sue for peace. In 1775, the Treaty of Camp Charlotte was signed, and that treaty ratified an earlier treaty called the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, which had been negotiated with the Iroquois, but not the Shawnee. And that treaty gave all land south of the Ohio River to Virginia, namely present-day Kentucky and West Virginia. The Treaty of Camp Charlotte bound the Shawnee to that earlier Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Cornstalk also agreed to return all white captives and stop attacking barges containing immigrants on the Ohio River. This ended the conflict and temporarily eased tensions on the frontier.
Well, the Battle of Point Pleasant marked a turning point in the westward expansion of the United States. It allowed for more peaceful settlement of the Ohio River Valley, opening the region to pioneers and settlers. However, it also marked a tragic loss for the Native American tribes, who continued to face displacement and hardships as settlers continued to move westward. By the following spring, though, news of this battle was replaced in the minds of Virginians and subjects of the Crown and other colonies by word of something else, the outbreak of the American Revolution. And along with that news came what would be called the first conspiracy theory in the history of the new country. It seems that patriots were convinced that the whole Battle of Point Pleasant was some kind of black op pulled by the royal governor of Virginia.
A black op in the American Revolution. Interesting.
Wow.
Well, here's how it worked. You see, Lord Dunmore led the British war effort in Virginia against the Patriots in the Revolution. Unfortunately for him, those same militiamen who had fought at Point Pleasant just months earlier managed to drive Lord Dunmore and the British troops supporting him out of Virginia. Dunmore, though, wasn't going to go out without a fight. Before he was kicked out of the Commonwealth, Dunmore tried to make allies of those very Shawnee to fight on behalf of the British against the Americans, and doing so convinced many in Virginia to believe the whole Battle of Point Pleasant was a setup designed to eliminate those militiamen who served under Colonel Andrew Lewis before British forces under Dunmore's command arrived. You see, no militia, then no forces to oppose Dunmore in a rebellion that he clearly, according to this conspiracy theory, knew was coming. According to most historians, though, Rod, there is no evidence that this was the case, and it's generally discounted. But it is still a conspiracy theory nonetheless, and the first one in American history.
It was a setup. Well, one way or the other, however you want to look at it, it was kind of a setup, the way that the whole thing kind of comes together. But, Dunmore had more on his mind. Dunmore had not only just, driving the Indians out and so forth, he was trying to make himself look good to where he was going to end up leading these British troops when the American Revolution kicked off, because he was still loyal to the British, if you want to call it that. He just demonstrated, I guess, to more people that, this is where his loyalties lie.
And that, folks, is the story of the Battle of Point Pleasant, another bit of the history of this place we call home. Thanks for listening. Now, if you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast. We're at Spreaker, and we'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe there. We're also on most all other podcast apps as well, including your favorite one. Just go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of our stories. Till next we meet. So long, everybody.